So, following the Canadian news media over the last few months, one cannot help but see the Rana Plaza disaster as somewhat of a global morality play. Over there, we have the following characters: greedy factory owners, victimized workers, and, only very occasionally mentioned, the labor activists trying to give voice to the plight of these workers. Over here, we have clueless but ethically sound retail executives trying to do the right thing, or simply responding to the ethics of their consumers. And the other, of course, faceless corporations who are refusing to take any ethical responsibility at all. And of course, as is often, what is often presented as the main subject of this tale, you, the consumer, who can save lives if you act virtuously within a market system that allows you to make ethical choices in your consumption. However, this is not a morality play about how ethically motivated individuals make good or bad decisions that have repercussions for other individuals. Rana Plaza is not an example of what can go wrong in the system if people don't make ethical decisions. It's actually how the system works. It's always worked this way. The deaths at Rana Plaza and Tazreen fashion did not occur simply because consumers made bad ethical choices in their desire to have more and more t-shirts for cheaper. These deaths occurred because capital will always seek out new mechanisms to squeeze more profit from the labor process. That's how the system works. That's the genius of it. This quest for profit at the expense of both workers and other capitalist firms sends capital around the globe looking for cheaper inputs, including labor power. That's what you provide when you go to work. Globalization of production change, which really took off in the last quarter of the 20th century, was, in fact, a response to a crisis in profitability in North America and an overaccumulation of capital. As returns on investment slowed, capital sought new productive outlets in other countries such as Bangladesh. This crisis in profitability was, in part, the product of successful worker struggles that saw labor in countries like Canada and the US receive a greater portion of the surplus value produced by their own labor. In large measure, these successes came about through trade union activity and the cooperative movement. And we forget that. We do. We forget that. And trade unions in particular seem to really have lost their charm in the public eye. But the historical answer as to how to make this better is always social struggle. It's just, that is the reality here, it's the reality in Europe, it's the reality currently in Bangladesh. But perhaps the lack of charm that trade unions present for us in North America is why we have seen such an NGOization of labor struggles over the last 20 years. And NGO involvement in labor struggles can go generally one of two ways. I've actually found some other things, but that's based on my research somewhere else and stuff like that. You can ask me about that later. So one of two ways, generally speaking, how NGOs are involved in labor struggles. First is an organization can offer to support workers who are seeking to establish their own union or cooperative, or support existing membership-based worker organizations, such as trade unions and cooperatives. And this can be really important, particularly in countries that have serious restrictions on trade union activity. Our local union here, the teaching assistants and sessional instructors, a couple of years ago donated $500 to a small union startup in Kolkata of waste pickers. But we couldn't actually give them the money directly because of legislation in India that prevents Indian trade unions from taking foreign money. So I can't remember who it was, Good Samaritans, I think, who were local to that and have been supporting these workers, actually acted as our bank and made sure that the money got to this organization. But it was tricky. So there's that example, where organizational innovation emerges out of restrictions on the trade union model. The other way that NGOs become involved in labor struggles is in seeking to address the plight of workers through their own campaigns and their own political projects that place themselves, rather than the workers or their elected leaders, at the center of the project. The latter is the kind of response that produced the corporate social responsibility movement of the 1990s. the latest in a long history of efforts to embed corporate practices within an ethico-political framework. A history that goes back as far as the original establishment of corporations in the United States. CSR in the 1990s followed the script of the day: deregulation and unfettered access to national markets around the world, what many people now call neoliberal globalization. I'm sure if you are an undergrad right now, it's one of those things that you just, it's just in the social sciences, it's just kind of clocked over in your head so many times it kind of makes you puke. Under neoliberalism, the state must not impede the action of corporations. If social ills occur due to corporate activity, then industry must somehow be induced to regulate itself, to be a good corporate global citizen. Of course, in this case, citizen is an absurdity, because the rights and responsibility of citizens are vis-a-vis a state, and global capital is not regulated by a global state. From the neoliberal logic of the day emerged a counter-movement to what was then called the anti-globalization movement, or the anti-corporate movement, or the anti-capitalism movement. It was all sorts of folks. Those are the brainy pictures you see now of kids in black hoodies. This counter-movement was made up of corporations, consumer and student groups, as well as a number of international non-government organizations. And the movement made enough of a splash that despite the misgivings of many union leaders and staff, the international union movement was forced to redirect scarce resources from efforts to create actual regulatory frameworks that might eventually curtail the power of capital within the global political economy. 20 years on, the CSR movement has been a complete distraction from actual solidarity work with workers in places like Bangladesh, and from efforts to create legal mechanisms that might support local efforts of workers to defend themselves. It is a failed effort, really, to legitimize the power of large corporations. And it spawned a global industry of private agencies, both for-profit and non-profit, that take money from transnational corporations to perform social audits. To make a long story short, this industry has evolved into the whitewash that union leaders predicted when it first emerged. Even in India, where I did my most recent research, where corporate social responsibility is legislated, corporate social responsibility practices are little more than a cynical nod to the very real development needs of the country. Now, in contrast to self-regulation and promises of good citizenship, the efforts of the international trade union movement since the 1970s have been aimed at forcing corporations to be accountable to their employees through legal agreements, regardless of where they operate. In the 1970s and 80s, the international union movement sought to develop codes of conduct for transnational corporations. And in many ways, these codes read like CSR brochures. But the difference was that they were designed in the perhaps naive hope that an international mechanism would develop that would bind corporations to these codes legally, not voluntarily. And they had high hopes on things like the GATS process, the WTO, or some other not yet constructed international system of economic regulation. Such efforts have been completely abandoned by the international union movement as the obvious fact that trade agreements, etc., were not ever going to act as an enforcement mechanism on capital. They were in fact designed to act as an enforcement mechanism on states. The second project of many global union federations is to negotiate global framework agreements with specific transnational corporations. And these are, in a sense, an effort of the global union federations to globalize the process of collective bargaining. And the goal is twofold. The goal is not twofold. This is the second fold of the twofold. The goal is to be able to put pressure on a common employer in different locations of the global political economy, not through regulation necessarily, but through the associational power of a global union federation. And this has been quite mixed in results. The Teamsters have had some success with this. The Seafarers have had some success with this. But really, it's been industry dependent. And also has been dependent upon the capacity of the Union Federation to actually rally the troops. This is kind of like what the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh is. That was mentioned just a bit ago. In which two global union federations, Industrial and Uni, are signatories. I won't go into it because it was gone into. Unlike voluntary codes of conduct, however, this system that they have designed will actually have recourse to arbitration to settle disputes, and it specifically mentions the International Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards. Of course, how useful this will be for Bangladeshi workers remains to be seen. So many of organized labor's past efforts have not been particularly successful, in large measure because they ran headlong into the rhetoric of self-regulation and an interstate system that has thus far been unable or uninterested in crafting an international mechanism that might counter the power of transnational corporations. Yet despite the limited success of these projects, I would suggest that they are more worthy of your support than the CSR movement for self-regulation for one very good reason. Even the failed efforts of trade unions should be supported over those that seek to displace unions as the voice of workers through social audits and boycott campaigns led by people who are not representatives of workers. Going back to my original comment about who the subject of this drama is. It's not you, and it's not me. It's the workers themselves and the people they elect to represent them. I'm not suggesting that consumer boycotts have no role in supporting workers' struggles. But the decision about who gets boycotted and when needs to be made by those who are affected. We've had disastrous campaigns in the past where groups of students in North America have decided that they are going to simply boycott something, boycott Coca-Cola in Colombia because they're bad and their union leaders got shot. Well, that wasn't called for by the workers of that factory, and they were actually really cheesed when their factory got shut down. And some of them still got shot anyways. Nor am I suggesting that there is no role for non-union NGOs. My research has found a number of really complementary relationships, both locally and internationally, between NGOs, particularly social movement organizations in both the international women's movement and in the international environment movement that have not only been supportive of the international trade union movement, I think they've actually pushed them in really important directions and actually had a really powerful impact on these organizations evolving into something more useful than they were during the Cold War. The situation in Bangladesh is as bad as it is currently in large measure because workers do not really have the right to establish unions of their own making, to make collective demands on their employers, and to do these things under the protection of the law. When they have a union meeting with their employer sits there and yells at them, threatens them, and sitting behind him is the representative from the Rapid Action Police Force, which is the anti-terrorist unit. That's the unit they send in to break up strikes. The recent changes to labor laws in Bangladesh are completely inadequate and largely meaningless anyways, so long as the repressive arm of the state will act in the interests of the Bangladeshi Manufacturers and Exporters Associations. Wrapping up, I would suggest that supporting the struggles of others means supporting the efforts that they themselves are making through their own self-organization. We need to move beyond the periodic desire to help the victims of capital accumulation and figure out how can we consistently support the struggles of others in the global production chains that we are all a part of, both as workers and as consumers. Thanks.